Would you sleep in a room if you knew someone had taken their last breath there? Not years ago, not long enough for the memory to fade, but recently, a place still warm with the weight of what happened. This isn't a horror movie setup. This was real. It happened in Osaka, Japan, at a hotel that tourists still book without question. One night, a traveling musician checked into a room he wasn't supposed to be in. He begged for it, demanded it even, and the staff, trying to be polite, made it happen. But later that night, a man in uniform knocked on his door, said he worked for the hotel, said he needed to search the room for something left behind by a previous guest. The musician let him in. The only problem? That hotel staff member had been dead for years. This is a true story, quietly whispered by those who've worked in that building. What happened in that room, and what kept coming back, will change the way you see hotel doors forever. The musician's name wasn't one you'd recognize, not even in Japan. Let's call him Paul. He wasn't famous, just familiar. One of those faces you might have seen performing in the background of a late-night TV show or opening for a more popular artist on a small stage. He was trying, grinding, still chasing that elusive break. Osaka was one of his regular stops. Every couple of months, he'd come down for a show, maybe a rehearsal, maybe to lay down a few tracks in a basement studio. And each time, without fail, he booked the same hotel. It wasn't luxury, it wasn't trendy, but it was close to the venue, close to food, and more importantly, familiar. Familiar enough that the staff always smiled when they saw him. Familiar enough that he started to believe he had some kind of unspoken VIP status. But on this particular trip in 2019, things didn't go as smoothly. Paul arrived late in the evening, suitcase in one hand, guitar case in the other, and walked up to the check-in counter, expecting his usual smooth welcome. But this time, the woman behind the counter gave him a tight smile and said something that made his jaw tighten. "I'm terribly sorry, sir. We're fully booked tonight." At first, he laughed, thought it was a joke, but the staff wasn't smiling. He leaned in, irritated, and lowered his voice. "I always stay here. Every time I come to Osaka. You know me. Check again." They did, but the answer didn't change. "I'm really sorry, sir. We're completely full tonight." And Paul snapped, not violently, but visibly. The kind of entitled frustration that bubbles up when someone believes the world owes them something small, like a room they didn't bother reserving. "Do you even know who I am?" he hissed. "I'm not just some walk-in. I'm here all the time. This is my hotel. I don't care if it's broom closet. Give me something." Japanese hospitality is known for being almost impossibly polite, even under pressure. And that night, the staff didn't argue. They looked at each other, whispered behind the counter, typed something quietly into the computer. Their expressions changed just slightly. After a moment, one of them gave a slight nod. "Actually, sir," she said, "we were able to make some adjustments. We do have one room available for you." Paul exhaled sharply through his nose, half pride, half exhaustion. "Thank you." Finally, she handed him the key card and bowed. But behind her smile, something in her eyes didn't quite match. Not fear, not guilt, just hesitation. Paul didn't notice. Or if he did, he didn't care. He grabbed the key, mumbled something under his breath, and headed toward the elevator, completely unaware that he had just forced his way into a room the hotel never intended to use that night. A room that had been marked off the system for a reason. A room they had deliberately kept unavailable for months, until now. When Paul stepped into the room, the first thing he noticed wasn't the size. It wasn't the old wallpaper or the dim lighting. It was the smell. It hit him before he even shut the door. Not foul, not rotten, but unmistakably strange. Thick, heavy, a scent that clung to the walls and crawled into his lungs. Not perfume, not bleach or detergent. It was incense, the kind people in Japan burn during memorial services. Paul recognized it immediately. He'd smelled it before. Funerals, shrines, moments of mourning. It wasn't the kind of thing you expect in a hotel room. And it wasn't subtle. It was as if someone had lit a fresh stick just minutes before he arrived. He wrinkled his nose and dropped his bags near the bed. "Weird," he muttered, but in his mind, he rationalized it. Maybe housekeeping burned it to mask some other smell. Maybe the previous guest had brought their own. Maybe just maybe, it was part of some obscure hotel tradition he didn't understand. Either way, it wasn't worth complaining about. After all, he was the one who demanded a room. Any room, and this is what they gave him. So he let it slide. The room itself was small, much smaller than the ones he was used to. It had a single bed, one small desk, and a compact bathroom that barely had room to turn around in. But Paul didn't care. He wasn't planning to spend much time here. This was just a place to crash, rinse off, and recover between rehearsals and ramen runs. He freshened up quickly, tossed on a new shirt, and headed back out the door. The night was still young, and Osaka was buzzing. That was one of the reasons Paul always stayed at this hotel. Not just because it was near his venue, but because it was steps away from one of the liveliest streets in the city. Bars, lounges, karaoke spots, pachinko parlors. Neon lights painted the streets in red, pink, and green, and the air pulsed with music and laughter even after midnight. Paul met up with a few musician friends at a yakitori joint around the corner. They drank a lot, talked about gigs, label drama, and who was sleeping with whose manager. By the time the group broke up, it was well past 2 a.m. Paul was tipsy, full, and wiped out. He tossed his jacket over his shoulder and started the short walk back to the hotel, his stomach heavy and his steps loose. The night air had cooled down, and the streets had started to empty. But Paul barely noticed. He was thinking of the soft bed, the silence, and the deep sleep that was about to hit him like a wave. When he got back to the room, he didn't bother brushing his teeth, didn't shower, didn't change. He kicked off his shoes, dropped his jacket on the lone chair, and collapsed onto the mattress face first. And that's when it began. As soon as his head hit the pillow, he felt it off. Something in the air. Something still not right. The incense still lingered, thicker now, as if it had seeped into the fabric of the room while he was gone. The scent was stronger near the bed. Paul groaned, half annoyed, half dazed. But exhaustion was heavier than discomfort. He adjusted his body and closed his eyes. That's when he heard it. A soft knock at the door. At first, Paul thought he imagined it. A knock at 2 a.m. makes no sense, especially in Japan, where hotel staff respect privacy like it's sacred. He blinked, still half drunk, lying there in the dark. Silence followed. Maybe it was another guest. Maybe someone trying the wrong door. Then it came again. A polite, rhythmic knock. Soft, but deliberate. Paul groaned, sat up slowly, and ran a hand down his face. His first thought was that maybe one of his drunk friends followed him back to the hotel as a joke. But when he shuffled over to the door and looked through the peephole, what he saw stopped him cold. A hotel staff member, male, mid-30s, standing stiffly outside in full uniform. Pressed shirt, polished shoes, white gloves. His hands were clasped in front of him, and his posture was unnaturally still, like someone trying too hard to look professional. Paul stared for a moment. The man didn't knock again. He just stood there, waiting. "What the hell?" Paul mumbled. He unlocked the door and cracked it open. The man bowed slightly. "Excuse me, sir," he said calmly, eyes low. "I apologize for the late-night disturbance. The front desk sent me. The guest who stayed in this room previously left behind a very important item." Paul's eyebrows furrowed. "Now? You're doing this now. Understand. I won't take more than a minute," the staff member replied, almost too calmly. "May I come in?" Paul hesitated. Everything about this was strange. The timing, the lack of a phone call, the man's tone. But he looked legit. Uniform clean. Badge clipped to his shirt. And Paul was too tired to argue. He stepped aside with a grunt. "Fine. Make it quick." The man entered and immediately began scanning the room with quick, purposeful movements. He didn't explain what he was looking for. He opened drawers, pulled back the curtains, got down on one knee, and peered under the bed. His hands moved fast, practiced like he'd done this before. Paul leaned against the wall with arms crossed, watching. "You gonna tell me what you're actually looking for?" The staff member didn't answer. He just muttered a quiet apology and continued the search. After about 2 minutes, he stood up, gave a deep bow, and said, "I'm sorry for the intrusion, sir. Thank you for your patience." And with that, he turned and walked out. Paul locked the door behind him and stood there for a long moment, trying to make sense of it. The incense smell hadn't gone away. In fact, it felt stronger, like the man had stirred it up during his frantic search. Paul shook his head, pulled off his shirt and fell back into bed, thinking he'd finally get some sleep. But just as his eyes were about to close again, there was another knock. Same rhythm, same softness, same time. Paul shot upright. "No way," he whispered, stumbling to the door. This time, he didn't look through the peephole. He yanked the door open and froze. It was him. Again. Same man. Same posture. Same damn expression. "Sir," he said, bowing again. "I apologize. May I search once more?" This time, he didn't wait for a yes. He just walked in. Paul barely had time to register what was happening before the staff member was already inside, retracing the same bizarre pattern as before. Curtains, drawers, under the bed. Every motion deliberate, mechanical, like muscle memory had taken over. But what unsettled Paul wasn't just the intrusion. It was how identical everything felt. Every movement, every bow, every sentence. Like watching a scene on repeat. Not just déjà vu, exact repetition. Paul stood there in the middle of the room, blinking in disbelief. "Hey," he said sharply. "You were just here. What the hell are you doing?" No response. The man continued his search in silence, not even acknowledging Paul's voice. Paul's breath hitched. This wasn't normal. Not for a hotel. Not for anywhere. "Hey," Paul barked louder this time. "What are you looking for?" Still nothing. The man rose slowly from his knees, gave another bow, and muttered again, "Apologies for the inconvenience." Then, just like before, he walked straight out, leaving the door to click shut quietly behind him. Paul stood frozen for several seconds, his hands clenched at his sides. This wasn't bad service. This was something else. Something that twisted his gut in the way only things that don't make sense can do. He grabbed the room phone and slammed the buttons, dialing the front desk. When a receptionist answered, Paul didn't hold back. "Get someone up here now. I don't care who. Just someone with authority. I've had enough of this SHD." 3 staff members showed up within minutes, 2 older, 1 younger, all bowing deeply the moment Paul opened the door. "We're very sorry for the disturbance, sir," one of them said. "We were told there was an issue." Paul's voice cracked as he spoke. He was angry, yes, but underneath it was confusion. "Issue? I'll tell you the damn issue. One of your staff members has barged into my room twice in the past hour. Said he's looking for something a past guest left behind. Didn't even wait for me to say yes the second time. Just walked in like he owns the place." The 3 staff members exchanged uneasy glances. "What did this staff member look like?" one of them asked carefully. Paul exhaled sharply, frustrated. "I don't know, normal. Male, Japanese, maybe 30s, clean uniform, white gloves. Collar was green, I think. Green stripe on the shirt or something." Silence. The younger staff member looked up, a strange tension in his face. "Sir, may I ask something?" Paul gestured sharply. "What?" The staff member pointed at his own uniform collar. It was a dark red. "Was it green like this?" he asked. Paul narrowed his eyes. "Yeah, that exact shade." Another silence. This one heavier. The 3 staff members looked at each other, their composure starting to crack. "Sir," the younger one said slowly, "our uniforms haven't had green collars since last year. We switched to red in the spring. No one working here wears green anymore." Paul's stomach dropped. "What are you saying?" he asked. "That guy doesn't work here." The youngest staff member hesitated. Then he glanced at the others. They didn't say a word. They just looked away, like they knew something but didn't want to say it. And then, quietly, almost in a whisper, the younger one finally spoke. "Sir, there was an incident in that room. A few years ago." Paul felt his throat tighten. The room suddenly felt colder. "What kind of incident?" he asked, his voice sharper now. The 3 staff members shifted uncomfortably. None of them answered right away. The older man looked at the younger, silently nudging him forward, as if the burden of truth was his alone to deliver. The young staff member took a breath. "A few years ago," he began, eyes fixed on the floor, "there was a guest who stayed in this room. Room 504. He claimed that something valuable had gone missing. A watch, I think. Maybe something more personal. But he accused a staff member of stealing it." Paul didn't move. He listened, rigid, arms crossed as if bracing himself. "The staff member," the young man continued, "was new. Very new. First job out of university. He wasn't the type to push back. Always polite. always trying to prove himself. When a guest complained, the manager made a scene, scolded him in the lobby, in front of other guests, loud enough for everyone to hear. He paused, and that night, he came into this room, the same one you're staying in now. Paul's expression went blank, his hands lowered to his sides. Okay, the young man hesitated again, but there was no point hiding it now. He hanged himself in a closet. Housekeeping found him the next morning. Paul blinked, slow and deliberate. Right here, he asked. In this exact room? Yes, the staff member replied. It was closed for months after that. We didn't rent it out to anyone. Guests who stayed in nearby rooms complained of strange sounds. Lights flickering. Even staff avoided coming up here unless they had to. Paul looked around, suddenly hyper-aware of everything. The closet, the curtains, the stale scent of incense still lingering faintly in the air. Wait, he said, stepping closer to the group. That smell, that weird incense. I smelled it the moment I walked in. Is that from him? Another glance was exchanged among the staff. This morning, the younger man said, monks came. We performed a ritual cleansing. Today is the anniversary of his death. Paul didn't speak. He didn't breathe. He just stood there, the weight of it sinking in like water through fabric. The strange smell, the late-night knock, the cold, expressionless man in a green-collared uniform, twice. It wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't bad hospitality. It wasn't even a prank. It was a pattern, a replay, a memory caught on loop. And the uniform? Paul asked finally, his voice hollow. We burned all the old ones, the older staff member said quietly. No one should have it. No one should be wearing green. Paul's legs moved before his brain caught up. He turned back toward the room, grabbed his bag, and started packing. No more questions. No more conversation. His heart was pounding now, not with fear, but with clarity, with a simple, unshakable truth. He never should have been in that room. The hotel staff stood silently in the hallway as Paul brushed past them. He didn't check out. He didn't ask for a refund. He didn't wait for an elevator. He walked straight down the stairs, guitar case in hand, suitcase rolling behind him, and out into the Osaka night. Some rooms are closed for a reason. And when a hotel tells you they're fully booked, maybe listen. Because the room they found for you might not have been meant for the living. Paul didn't speak to anyone as he exited the hotel that night. He didn't look back. The streets of Osaka were still glowing. Neon lights pulsing, late-night food stalls steaming under the flicker of red lanterns. But he didn't see any of it. All he could hear was the staff member's voice. We burned the old uniforms. No one should be wearing green. As he walked, suitcase bumping along behind him, Paul replayed everything in his head. The incense, the knock, the dead-eyed stare of the man who entered twice without permission, moving as if pulled by invisible strings. Paul had spent enough time in the entertainment industry to be skeptical of ghost stories. But this wasn't theater. This wasn't superstition. This was something else. Something rooted in reality, just strange enough to be true. And that's what made it worse. Later that week, after canceling his remaining bookings and moving to a different hotel, Paul made a quiet phone call to one of his friends who had grown up in Osaka. He didn't go into detail, just asked, have you ever heard anything weird about a hotel that starts with AT? In the Chul Ward, near the shopping arcades. There was a pause on the line. Then his friend's voice dropped. You stayed there? Yeah, Paul said. Room 504. Another pause. That's the one, his friend finally muttered. You know the story, right? Paul nodded, though he didn't really. Not the full version. So his friend filled in the gaps. It had happened 3 years ago. A young staff member, fresh out of college, eager, well-liked, had been blamed for a guest's missing property. The guest made a huge scene, accused him of theft, called him a liar. The hotel manager, in an effort to save face in front of other customers, scolded the staff member publicly, loudly. Red-faced, brutal. It wasn't policy. It wasn't fair. It was personal. That night, the staff member returned to room 504, the last room he had cleaned that day. He locked the door behind him and didn't check out. In the morning, housekeeping found him in the closet, neck bruised, a small note in perfect handwriting left on the bed. I only ever wanted to do good work. The incident never made national headlines. It was handled quietly, as many things in Japan are. No scandal, no lawsuits, just whispers among locals. Staff who refused to work the fifth floor. Guests who said they heard knocking in the middle of the night, polite knocking. Some claimed the room was cursed. Others said it was just guilt lingering in the walls. But one thing remained consistent across every story. The staff member always wore the old uniform. Always green. Always spotless. Paul listened silently. His friend didn't need to convince him. He had already lived it. And no matter how much he wanted to write it off as exhaustion, hallucination, or some elaborate prank, he couldn't. Because he knew that man had been in the room. He had heard his voice, watched him move, saw the creases in his uniform, the reflection of the hallway light in his shoes. That wasn't imagination. That was real. Later, Paul learned something else. Every year, on the anniversary of the staff member's death, the hotel quietly allowed monks to come and perform a cleansing ritual. It was meant to be private, quiet, just a formality. But this year, they made one mistake. They didn't block out the room completely. So when Paul, the entitled guest with a temper, demanded a room that didn't exist, they gave him that one. Because technically it was available, and they never thought someone would actually insist on staying there. Second story, the rent-a-boyfriend job. Osaka again, but this time a different story. A different kind of horror. Not the kind that knocks politely at your hotel door, but the kind that smiles at you from across a dinner table and asks you to stay just a little longer. Yujin wasn't from Osaka originally. He had moved there just a few months prior, a fresh college student from a smaller prefecture. He was quiet, soft-spoken, the kind of guy you wouldn't look at twice on the street. But once you talked to him, he had this gentle charm that made people trust him instantly. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't bold. But he had manners, clean clothes, and just enough confidence to pass as put together. He also had no money. Yujin's family wasn't poor, but they weren't comfortable either. They sent him what they could, enough to cover rent in a tiny dorm and scrape by on cheap meals. But there was never anything extra. No nights out, no new clothes, no games, no hobbies. Just school, instant noodles, and a quietly mounting pressure to survive. It was one of his friends who first floated the idea. A casual suggestion during a walk back from class. "Why don't you get a part-time job?" the friend said. "You're good with people. And let's be real, there are girls who would pay to spend time with someone like you." Yujin laughed it off at first. "Like what? Host clubs?" "Not even," the friend said, grinning. "There's this app. You rent yourself out." "Not like that," he added quickly, seeing Yujin's face twist. "I mean as a boyfriend. It's mostly older women. They pay you just to hang out. Dinner, a walk, shopping. Nothing creepy. You get free meals, and they tip well. It's totally safe. You'd be perfect for it." That night, Yujin couldn't stop thinking about it. He'd never considered anything like that before. But the more he thought about it, the more it made sense. He didn't have time for a traditional job. His class schedule was a mess. But an evening here or there, just talking to someone, eating a nice meal, why not? He downloaded the app, and everything changed. Within a week, Yujin had multiple bookings. 10,000 yen here, 15,000 yen there. Dinner dates, shopping trips, conversations that felt like nothing but paid like something. And most of the women were polite, lonely, and grateful. They didn't want anything more than company. And Yujin, with his soft voice and calm presence, was exactly what they needed. He was respectful, clean-cut, never crossed boundaries. And that reputation spread. His ratings climbed. More clients messaged him. The money started to stack up. For the first time since moving to Osaka, he wasn't just surviving. He was living. Nice clothes, better food, a sense of freedom. Yujin became selective. He only accepted the highest-paying clients now. He knew his worth, knew the game. And then one night, a new message came in. Simple, direct, chilling. "I'm a single woman, almost 60. I'd like to book you for 3 hours. Please come to my home, cook dinner with me, and take a short nap after. Nothing sexual. I will pay you 300,000 yen. Yujin stared at the message. 300,000 yen. Nearly $3,000 US. For 3 hours. His hands hovered over the keyboard. He asked the usual questions. Where is she located? Was she in Osaka? Could she send her address? Her reply came in pieces. Yes, I'm in the area, she wrote. But when he asked for a location, she didn't send a pin. She didn't even type out an address. Instead, she sent him a photo, a hand-drawn map, sketched out in pencil on lined notebook paper, with little arrows, labels like turn left at the stone lantern, and if you pass the rice fields, you've gone too far. Eugen tilted his head. Who still drew maps in 2020? But then again, for 300,000 yen? Maybe it was just an old lady. Maybe she didn't know how to use Google Maps. Maybe it was weird, but not dangerous. That's what he told himself, over and over. Because what was the worst that could happen? The next morning, Eugen packed a small overnight bag, just in case. The hand-drawn map was still open on his phone screen, the photo grainy but legible. It was bizarre, yes. Outdated even, but everything else about the offer seemed legitimate. The woman had verified her identity through the app. She paid the deposit without hesitation. And most importantly, she seemed gentle in her messages. No red flags, just old-fashioned. The first leg of the trip was simple. A quick bullet train ride to a rural station about 2 hours outside Osaka. The platform was almost empty when he arrived. Just an old vending machine humming and a few local farmers getting off with baskets of fresh vegetables. No neon lights, no noise, just sky, fields, and the low buzz of summer heat. Eugen stepped out of the station and pulled up the photo again. According to the map, his first landmark was a narrow trail leading behind the station, flanked by trees. He found it easily enough and began to walk, adjusting his backpack as he went. At first, it felt almost charming, like something out of a travel blog. The handwritten notes on the map had a certain warmth to them. Little comments like watch your step, uneven ground, or you'll see a funny-shaped rock on the right. She'd clearly taken her time making it. But after 30 minutes of walking, that charm wore off. The trail narrowed. The landmarks became harder to identify. There were no signs, no shops, just long stretches of cracked pavement between rice fields, bamboo groves, and the occasional abandoned shed. The sky felt too quiet, the air too still, and something about that silence started to dig into Eugen's nerves. Where is this place? He muttered under his breath. He checked his phone again. No signal. Just as he was starting to wonder if he'd made a huge mistake, the final marker on the map appeared. A crooked wooden sign with faded kanji scrawled across it, barely legible, just like the one in the drawing. And behind it, a house. No, not a house. A mansion. Tall stone walls overgrown with ivy. A heavy wooden gate. And beyond it, a sprawling 2-story structure. Traditional Japanese architecture with dark wooden beams and glass panels that reflected the clouded sky. Eugen blinked. He had expected a modest home, maybe a cozy country house, something that matched the tone of the woman's messages. But this was grand, isolated, almost out of place. He walked up to the front gate and hesitated for a second. Then he pressed the doorbell. It rang out, a soft chime that echoed in the still air. Seconds later, the intercom crackled. A woman's voice answered. Hello. Hi. I'm Eugen, he replied. From the app. Another short pause. Oh, wonderful, she said. I've been waiting all day. Please come in. Just push the gate. It's not locked. Eugen did as instructed. The heavy wooden gate creaked open effortlessly. The courtyard inside was pristine, lined with white gravel. A koi pond glimmered near the entrance, and a stone path led to the front door. He walked slowly, trying not to feel overwhelmed. Everything was so quiet, too quiet, but he kept moving. Before he could even knock, the door opened, and there she was. She smiled gently, mid-50s, maybe 60 like she had said, but somehow timeless. Her hair was tied back neatly. Her kimono looked expensive, her skin smooth. She looked elegant, wealthy, definitely, but also warm. Welcome, she said. Please come in. Eugen stepped inside, removing his shoes at the entrance. The floors beneath his feet were polished to a shine. The air smelled of sandalwood and old wood. Everything was perfect, almost too perfect, like a museum. Not a speck of dust, not a single misplaced item. To the left, A guest room with freshly folded bedding and sunlight spilling in through slatted blinds. To the right, a wide-open tatami room with a low table, cushions neatly aligned, and a subtle breeze moving the curtains. It was beautiful, but it didn't feel alive. Eugen couldn't put his finger on it at first, but something about the house felt preserved, like it was being kept in a moment that had long since passed. And then, as they walked past one of the inner rooms, something caught his eye. A shrine, lit dimly by a small lamp. At its center was a wooden altar, polished and adorned with golden ornaments, and a large statue of the Buddha. There were incense sticks in a holder, half-burned. Offerings neatly placed, flowers, fruit, a bowl of rice. And right beneath the Buddha statue, a framed photo. Eugen stopped walking. He stared. The woman noticed and turned back to him. "That's my son," she said softly. "He passed away a few years ago." Eugen didn't answer, because the face in the photo looked exactly like his own. Eugen stood frozen in the hallway, his eyes locked on the photo resting beneath the Buddha statue. It wasn't just a passing resemblance. It wasn't one of those "he kind of looks like me" moments. No, this was him. Same face, same cheekbones, same eyes. Even the hairstyle was eerily close. The kind of similarity that makes your stomach turn, not in vanity, but in unease. The woman didn't seem to notice the change in his expression. Or maybe she did, and ignored it. She stepped beside him and looked at the altar with a quiet fondness. "That's my son," she repeated. "He was about your age when he passed away." Eugen swallowed, trying to stay composed. I see," he said carefully. "I'm sorry for your loss." She nodded slowly, still smiling. "Thank you. He was very special. Quiet, thoughtful, a lot like you, actually." Eugen's lips twitched into something that resembled a smile, but inside, every muscle in his body had gone rigid. Something wasn't right. This wasn't grief. This wasn't a shrine built out of loss. This felt curated, like she had built a world that hadn't moved on, a house that hadn't aged since the day her son died. But what disturbed him most wasn't the photo itself. It was the feeling he got staring at it, that chilling sensation that maybe, just maybe, that photo hadn't always been of her son. They continued on into the kitchen, where she laid out fresh groceries on the counter. Vegetables, packaged meat, a few herbs tied with twine. She looked at him sweetly and said, "Shall we begin?" Eugen nodded, trying to shake off the pit in his stomach. He focused on the cutting board, the knife, the rhythm of chopping, the steam rising from the boiling water. Normal things, tasks, anchors. Behind him, the house remained silent. No TV, no music, just the sound of knife against wood and the soft shuffle of her feet as she moved slowly around the room. He could feel her eyes on him, watching, studying. He smiled politely over his shoulder. "You have a beautiful home." "Thank you," she replied. "It's been the family a long time. It's just me here now." Another smile, another silent stare. They sat down to eat shortly after. The food was good. She complimented his cooking multiple times, always with a warm nod, always with that same faint, unreadable smile. But Eugen couldn't eat much. His appetite was gone. After dinner, she stood to clean up and gently waved him toward the living room. "Relax," she said. "You've done enough. Just rest. I'll take care of the dishes." He nodded and sank into the cushion of the couch, trying to breathe, trying to be rational. Maybe the photo wasn't him. Maybe grief had blurred her memory, made her see her son in other faces. People cope in strange ways. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling. He pulled out his phone quietly and brought up the photo of the map again. At the top of the image, in faint handwriting, he noticed something he hadn't seen before. A date. 5 years ago. The same year, she said her son passed. Eugen's hands started to sweat. He opened a browser. There was a Japanese website, half forum, half official archive, where users could check the history of properties, specifically if a death had occurred there. Some called them stigmatized properties. It wasn't illegal to live in them, but landlords were supposed to disclose it. He typed in the rough address based on the local area and cross-referenced it with a few keywords. And then there it was. One result, one incident, same year, same description, mother with diagnosed psychological disorder, son murdered in the home. Cause of death, stabbing, with a kitchen knife. Deemed mentally unfit to stand trial. Not imprisoned, still residing at the property. Eugen's entire body went cold. He looked up slowly, and there she was, in the doorway, drying her hand with a towel. Smiling. "Ready for our nap?" she asked softly. Two different stories. Two different people. One in a city hotel, one in a countryside mansion. Both walked into rooms they were never meant to enter. Both smiled, nodded, and ignored the feeling that something was off. Because that's what we're taught to do. Be polite, be agreeable, don't make a scene. But horror doesn't always announce itself with screams or blood. Sometimes it knocks softly. Sometimes it cooks you dinner. Sometimes it wears a uniform and says, "May I come in?" And by the time you realize something's wrong, it's already too late. Paul thought he was dealing with bad customer service, a scheduling error, an overworked employee. He didn't realize he was talking to a memory still stuck on repeat, a ghost playing out its final apology. Because the guilt in that hotel room never left. It clung to the walls. It wore the same uniform. And on the anniversary of his death, it answered the knock instead of the staff. Eugen thought he found the perfect side hustle. No pressure, no danger. Just conversation, meals, and easy money. But he didn't know he'd been chosen. Not for his personality, not for his charm, but for his face. He wasn't a guest in that house. He was a substitute, a vessel, a chance to bring back what she had destroyed with her own hands. And if he hadn't trusted that sick feeling crawling up his spine, he might never have left. What connects these stories isn't ghosts. It's not even death. It's misplaced longing. A hotel that couldn't let go of the shame etched into its walls. A mother who didn't want closure. She wanted a second chance to rewrite what she broke. And in both cases, the warning signs were quiet, almost polite, because the scariest people aren't always the loud ones. Sometimes they smile. Sometimes they welcome you in. Sometimes they say thank you before they ask you to stay forever. So here's the truth no one likes to say out loud. The most dangerous situations don't always feel dangerous. Sometimes they feel familiar, safe, charming. But if your gut ever screams louder than the words coming out of someone's mouth, listen to it. Because by the time the door clicks shut, the part of you that knew better might be the only part that never makes it out.